this episode of Psychedelics Today with Daniel Shankin. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to chat with you because I did a bit of digging in the vaults of Psychedelics Today, Daniel, and you were last on the show in 2019. So,
oh wow, it's been a minute.
Yeah. What's been happening the last 5 years, man?
You're having me back.
Yeah, been a good 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Really beautiful to have you. So we did meet in person in New York at the Psychedelic Assembly, the Athenaeum, a while back, and we've been in touch a wee bit, and I know, yeah, you're close with Joe and Kyle, so it's really awesome to have you here. It's awesome that you're joining the Vital teaching team, teaching around coaching methodology. I love your course that you've developed, and I really like humor that you bring into this world, so I'm hoping, yeah, we can cover that and how it relates to spirituality and mystical experiences and much more. As an opening question, it's a little bit like a chicken and the egg. In your life, Daniel, what came first? Was it kind of mysticism and spirituality, or was it psychedelics, or did they kind of appear at the same time, would you say?
I think they've always been kind of woven into one another. I mean, my grandmother did give me a yoga book when I was like 8. Like my grandma, I think that's just what the ladies were doing, at that month. They were doing yoga. And so she gave me a yoga book, and it had some of the philosophy in it. But and so that was interesting to me, and yoga practice was interesting to me, meditation and such. I think, if we believe that the soul has a journey and it gets kind of reborn and that kind of stuff, is that, I was more of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi kid than like a Han Solo kid. You know what I mean? Like archetypally speaking, I was sort of more drawn to that end of things. There's pictures of me at like the Renaissance fair, and my brother is dressed up like a knight and I was dressed up like a monk. That's just sort of where the leaning was for me. Psychedelics certainly brought that forward. The first one, being cannabis, starting to smoke pot, I was like 13 years old. And that's sort of how we first learned to sit in circle and manage our breath and start to be intentional and kind of journey with our minds and listening to, figuring out set and setting and the right music and things like that. And that was not not mystical, in a lot of ways. And, listening to our parents' psychedelic rock records and getting turned on to the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra through the soundtrack to Hair, things like that. But these have always sort of, woven in and out of things. And, I just, if people have heard my story, I've said this a million times, but, I think I was having a tough time on some LSD once. And, a big kid, who's probably 27, gave me a copy of Be Here Now and said, read this, you'll feel better. And sure enough, I did. And so that has kind of always been how I have found support for my mind and my heart and my soul. And, both in my day-to-day life and also to bolster my psychedelic practice, which can be tough on the mind, right? Sometimes.
How do you make sure that the Obi-Wan Kenobi archetype doesn't become spiritual bypassing? And this is not just in your own life, but just generally speaking, because I think it's very easy to assume an identity, particularly in the age of social media and kind of popular psychedelic culture. So any kind of tips for folks out there?
Well, for better or worse, there wasn't social media back then. So that wasn't, there wasn't anybody to present it to. There was just your friends, and they knew you already. So they were like, okay, man, like if you're into that, but we would have to, what's our definition? What is our shared definition in this moment of spiritual bypassing? I guess is what I would ask.
Yeah.
And also for the people at home who may or may not have an idea, how are we going to define that?
Yeah. Yeah. Where I was coming from with it is around the one aspect of it being the sense of self, the definition of self, and wanting, in a sense, a packaged, simple version of that passes publicly that may not be the true complexity and messiness and shadow side of the self or the selves that need more time, that need more kind of
Yeah.
understanding, and it's just more complex than we like to admit to ourselves or to others.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I like about um, kind of, there's when you meet real Buddhists, they're really real, whatever that means. I'm just going to throw that out there. People can do what they want with it. It's been my experience when I meet like real Buddhists, they're very upfront about how messy they are, like that they're works in progress. There are some folks who go this sort of like, oh, I'm like enlightened already kind of, and everything is a perfection of all, that sort of non-dual thing. Whereas, people who have a real understanding of kind of the nature of suffering and the nature of the psychological twists and the limitless amount of misapprehension we have, and fear and greed and hatred and all that kind of stuff, like recognize that that is running most of the show. And there's no shame in that. I think that there's like a big shame root to spiritual bypassing, that like it's not okay for me to be a mess. And when we recognize that it's okay for us to be a mess, not only is it okay, it's the way it is, that there's a lot more kind of humility, there's a lot more gratitude. There are kind of two quotes. I mean, they say the same thing, but I think Rumi said one of the greatest mistakes a spiritual aspirant on the path can make is to think that the 10,000 lunatics who are living in their mind have all packed up and left. Right? Like the lunatics are still there. You can't just you can't just take a couple grams of mushrooms and think that that was an eviction notice for all of the lunatics. And Chris Bache says it in LSD and the Mind for the Universe, is that, and Jack Kornfield says it too, right? So Chris Bache says, just because we have a wise and profound experience on LSD doesn't automatically mean that we're a wise, profound person, right?
Right.
That like that has to be worked for, right? And Jack Kornfield in After the Ecstasy, the Laundry says, we're ordinary people who have experienced non-ordinary things. So there's that. And I think that there is a lot more that we can offer each other from this place of kind of walking the path, of just being another confused, confused seeking person, working it out. And that in that there's a confidence and a certainty that I think supersedes any pretend confidence and certainty of thinking
Yeah.
that we're done.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're sharing, Daniel. And part of what this reinforces is the value of meditation, mindfulness, for many reasons. But one of them is that if that relationship with ourselves, where we're checking in, is able to hold complexity, contradictions, and just see, oh, today I'm feeling like this. It was really hard, or it was really crap. Yesterday's was completely different, or this is what's going on in my life, in my mind right now. Then I think we have this sense of kind of flow and multiplicity, and infinitude as well of ourself, and that it's never perfect, it's never finished, and that it's just an ongoing process of evolution or integration. And I think that's why meditation and mindfulness can be really helpful. I personally had a really tough time with meditation when I went through my like hyper Buddhist phase in my mid-20s. Like Buddhism just was like and meditation just took me down a really dark path of just meditating too much and trying to be too enlightened. So that taught me a lot. But generally speaking, as a skill that we can just whip out and use in life, I think it helps us just do a bit more exhale, and let more things go and just go with it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would have a better time in psychedelic spaces if they had the skill to drop what they're thinking on a dime and come back to their breath. Just let it go. Like and that's one of my practices at random intervals, is just whenever I remember to do it, I was like, back to the breath, drop it. If it's important, it'll still be there, but the mind will just, mind just chew, run. I was like, okay, just back to the breath. And so training the mind to come to the present moment on a regular basis, even when the thoughts are alluring, is a potent skill to have. And to even know that that's available, it can really keep us out of a lot of trouble. It can keep us out of a lot of trouble, because most of the things that we think aren't true, many of the pathways of the mind, I don't think are worth going down, right? Because there's somebody recently posted something that they think that some parts of the mind are procedurally generated. You familiar with that term?
No. What does that mean, or how do you interpret that?
So there are video games where you're sort of going down tunnels and pathways, and the pathways haven't been built yet until you go down. So they're spontaneously generated by the program, right? And you can just wander through them forever, and they'll just keep giving you monsters to shoot. And so I think that it's not a terrible metaphor for some parts of our mind. We go looking for shadow, we go looking for problems, and we find them. Whereas there's a lot of benefit to just, in the Yoga Sutras, they call it Praktipaksha Bhavana, cultivate the opposite. It's like, enough, basta, enough of that. I'm going to come to the present, or I'm going to think about something else. Some stuff really needs to be healed, right? And that's the art of it, right? That's the art of exploring the mind, right? There's some inner child stuff in there that definitely needs to be healed. And then sometimes we just have fantasies about problems, and we just kind of feed into them, and then it's enough, stop, knock it off. At some point, enough. Training the dog, just back to the present.
Yeah. And that was procedurally generated.
I believe that's what it's called. If I'm getting it wrong, somebody in the comments can correct us.
Yeah. I came across something recently as well in the last week. I don't remember exactly, but it was to do with masturbation, but more like psychological and psychedelic masturbation, of meaning the kind of constant playing with thoughts and concepts and ideas that, in a sense, have either mystical powers or reassurances. And I think it ties in a little bit with what you were sharing there. And I think the mind does that. Like, we can go down so many infinite doorways and portals. And maybe the breath, really helps to ground in the body, and kind of somatic approaches really help to ground into, maybe less meaning. I think meaning making can sometimes trip us up, especially when we're trying to do it in the moment that we're experiencing, the content, and it's just kind of zipping past us, and what does it mean? But I think we've got this almost excessive desire for meaning making.
Yeah, which we can't know. We can't understand. Maharaji said it's better to love than it is to try and figure it out. What do you think you're really going to figure out? What's it going to point you to? And that's better than just loving what is. You said we're not perfect, but it's, on another level, it's all perfect. And just like, it's time for us to get with the program.
Yeah. There was in my Buddhist days, that there was a couple of Thai monks that I really liked, that were from the forest tradition, which meant they weren't in these monasteries. They didn't have these big, nice luxurious houses and temples. They were like literally in the mosquito swamp infested forests, and they were like digging and chopping wood. Ajahn Chah was one of them, and Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. But Ajahn Chah was this kind of like Zen style. It might have been the Chan tradition. And he would do that kind of Zen thing sometimes, with just giving his disciples a little clip around the ear and tripping them up and having a little cheeky giggle on the side when they were just taking it all a bit too seriously and trying to get a little bit too enlightened too quickly. It's just like, okay, go and dig that shit pit over there of manure and come back in a week, and then we'll talk again. And there's something about that, in a sense, not trying so hard to seek and to gain or to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's there to gain?
Yeah. And I wanted to also
That you
mention,
don't have already.
right, what is there to gain that we don't have already? So how do we reveal what we have already, or how do we just be who we already are, and for that to be enough? Yeah. I wanted to bring into our conversation Amma.
Okay.
And I'd love you to introduce to folks who she is, because I don't know so much. But I was in India in my late 20s and had I queued up for like 5-6 hours in Karnataka, and 100,000 people were there, and I had a hug, and it was amazing. But that was all my own experience. So I in a sense, the power of hugs here, not words and meanings and wise pieces, but just hugs and love. So who's Amma, and what's this? What does she do, and what are these hugs?
Oh, this is a teacher that I've been hanging out with since about 2002. I was the assistant manager at the yoga bookstore. I don't even think I was, I was training to be a yoga teacher. And all of the cool kids were going to see Amma in New York. It's when I lived in Philly. And they're like, oh, it's this big gathering, and she gives these hugs. And sure enough, it was a big gathering. I think it was at Columbia University back then. And you get a token because she's going to hug like 7,000 people. You can't stand it. There's plenty of lines, but a lot of the time is spent meditating and receiving teachings, and then just hanging out and drinking chai and being with people and being in the energy. So, and not everybody, I don't expect everybody to kind of get with this at all. This is a hard pill for some folks to swallow. But it's my sense that some people come either by birth or by chance or through practice or what have you. They've got kind of more kind of spiritual energy. You might call it Shakti if you speak that language, right? This kind of energy that is spiritual energy is an energy that might wake you up more, right? That might give you more awareness. And this is one of the things that we'll be covering in when I teach coaching methodology, because the practice of coaching is having conversations that help the client gain more awareness about their own situation, right? Their own thoughts and emotions, because it creates more creativity and resourcefulness for them, right? It's like we all know that we have stuff under the surface. We're icebergs, right? We're kind of living the 10% above the water, and most of the stuff that's going on in our life is underneath the surface. And that's one of the reasons we like psychedelics so much, is because it tunes us in. It brings things to awareness. They're non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. And it lets us see, because we don't know what we don't know. And it's like, oh, this is stuff I haven't been looking at. I can work with it. Plus aliens and stuff, but that's another story. And so a good coaching conversation acts in that way, right? How do we ask questions and offer practices to our clients that point them to their own wisdom? And it'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Okay, that's something good to consider. Let me put together an answer based on my own wisdom, as opposed to teaching, which is just, hey, this is stuff you should know. So I'm into that. Like, I'm into having my awareness of my own situation raised, right? And one of the things that I find through that is that people often make better choices. It's like we are confronted, sometimes we take psychedelics and we are confronted with the consequences of our actions in ways that we don't ordinarily see. Oh, wow, when I do this, this happens. These are the results of this. Oh man, I should really stop doing that. Or, and so it's kind of why love is so important, because sometimes we can shame ourselves, right? It's like, that's one of the purposes of a good guide, I think, is to love us when we're confronted with the fact that we've been terrible for a while, right? And quite often we haven't been as terrible as we think, but we've been not our best selves. And we get confronted with that. And if there's been a lot of shame or criticism in our past, that can be real hard to see. And then we need, a guide or a coach or a community to be like, it's okay. You can breathe. You can get through this. This isn't the worst thing that's ever happened. Right. So I dig that stuff. So, and then we know that the molecules can do it. It seems to me that there are some people, just by being in their presence, that happens too. Right. And she seems to be one of these people, right? So this woman from southern India, humble fishing village, and she carries this energy. And so when I meditate, when we all meditate, like we have good sessions, we have bad sessions, whatever that means. And sometimes it's easier to drop into things. And sometimes we discover things about ourselves and we can process what we can process and, be present for whatever we can be present for as long as we can, right? We've just kind of got that skill. And hopefully over time that increases. Sometimes when we're in the presence of certain people, that's supercharged. And the peace is greater, and then the challenges are greater, and we're able to meet it in a greater way, and we're able to do more about it in a certain way. And then sometimes you're in a room with, a couple of thousand people, and they're all trying to do it too at the same time, and the air becomes really rarefied, and we can get a lot out of it. We can, kind of move through some of those challenges, and sometimes we can find a place of peace. What else do we have to gain other than what we already are? And we can have a better chance of touching that for a longer period of time. So I like environments where that's available to me.
Yeah.
I need all the help I can get. And I like people who are able to offer that to me, right? And so this teacher, Amritananda Maima, seems to be able to do that, right? And there are all of these trappings that go with it, and there's prayer beads and Sanskrit mantras and chanting in various languages from the subcontinent. And, sometimes people dress up in a certain way and all this kind of stuff. And, I've gone through phases of that. At the end of the day, I'm trying to work with my heart and my mind, and I can do that in that community. And that's really valuable. And, whether people are drawn to it or not, hopefully they're finding a community where that process, that desire to become better and to grow and to become more aware and to become more loving is valued and supported and mirrored back.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. Sure.
I want to go in a direction now that takes that being around a certain energy, certain people, so that our molecules are feeling a certain way in community, to, Mount Tam and what you've been doing for a while. With I think the integration circle that you've been running and the organization that you're the founder of. So I'd love to understand, where did that come from, Tam Integration? What does it mean? But also, like, the vision, maybe as a community, as for holding people, as for being a container for what exactly?
Oh, for that stuff that we were just saying. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
But Tam, which is short for Mount Tamalpais, which is a mountain in Marin, which is where I lived when I started it. Sometimes people ask what it stands for. Yeah. It just stands. Mountains just stand. Which is the nice thing about them, right? You can count on a mountain to be there. And so, I wanted integration circles. They largely didn't exist back then. There was a couple, Cherie was holding them, and Julie from Erie was holding them. And I wanted one too. And I wanted them closer, and more, I wanted them for me, right? I needed this stuff. And, I'm used to, doing this more in the yoga studio, like having the community and having the practice in the yoga studio. I owned and ran a yoga studio for a bunch of years. moved to the West Coast, and this seemed like a cool thing to explore. And, if somebody once said, they said, I'm not sure if this is a support group or if this is like a spiritual community for growth and transformation. And I was like, yes. Right? Because sometimes people think integration circles and they think that it's for like folks who had a bad time, but and it is, but they're also really rich when people who are having an awesome time, but want to share that and are still curious about like being in community around it, want to show up, because integration circles sort of happen if people have if people are sort of like in a community already where they're maybe drinking ayahuasca with the same people on a monthly basis or something, they all have integration circles and they have that community. But if for small pockets of folks, it wasn't really the case. They didn't, these pockets tended to be insular and maybe suspicious because of the drug war, so people weren't necessarily sharing information in, as the crypto bros would say, in a decentralized way, and so it just, one of the things that I've seen is that, information sharing creates greater intelligence and wisdom, creates more awareness. And so it just sort of kind of grew out of that craving, for that. And then it kind of grew from there. Like it wasn't necessarily my intention to kind of hold events, but Veronica from Polaris came to one of the circles and she says, you should interview me on stage somewhere, right? This is back when we used stages before COVID. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, you know how Mike Margulies interviewed Michael Pollan? She was like, you should interview me. I was like, I don't know if we need the UCSF, ballroom for that, auditorium for that. And she was like a smaller place. And so I had a friend who had like a coffee shop with a stage, in San Rafael, which is cool because like Ram Dass spoke there and Alan Watts spoke there and like all these great people, this kind of
Nice.
old funky bookstore coffee shop. And so, we would just do a split at the door and, it was real easy for it to happen. And it was before there were psychedelic events in San Francisco every day of the week. And so, we were getting people schlepping over the bridge from Oakland and SF to come to our little talks in San Rafael, and it was great. And so we just started doing more stuff that the community asked for. The coaching training exists because people were asking for it. I want to be an integration coach. How do we do that? It's like, okay, let's do, it's like, I can teach you how to do that. So we're teaching people how to do that. And that's kind of how it emerged. It's sort of, my desire mixed with community desire. A lot of people, this is kind of where we shift from kind of Buddhist theory to maybe Kashmir Shaivism, like from tantric theory, where desire isn't necessarily the enemy. Desire is what actually makes the world go round. Pretending you don't have desires doesn't make you anything but weird, right? Then we're back to shame, right? And so the fact that, I wanted a circle, other people wanted a circle, people wanted other events, people wanted other opportunities for learning. These are all fairly wholesome desires in the grand scheme of things. And it creates maybe a limitless variety of Dharma activity, perhaps, as some of the Vajrayana tantric practitioners say, the limitless variety of Dharma activity. It's doing good stuff in the world. We're stuck here. We might as well do good stuff. Can't just sit in the forest like monks, We're not forest monks.
Yeah. Have you seen folks that come to your circles or that, get some coaching, then bring the circles to their communities or launch something online in a slightly different way? So, are these kind of ripples of circles literally spreading out from what you've been doing over the years?
Yes, I think so. And one of the first offerings, sort of the evergreen offerings that we offered, which was inspired in some ways. I was like, oh, Psychedelics Today has classes that people can just buy whenever. I was like, that's cool. And so I made a hold your own integration circle class. Um, and people liked it. And I believe that people went off to use it. And I, get emails sometimes from folks letting me know that, hey, it works.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, it works.
Yeah, because when we think about it, how many integration circles are there, and how many do we need, and how many will we need? Outside of, I suppose, the medicalized model, and yeah, those are pretty potentially challenging circles to be part of, or to run, or to know, in a sense, how to create them. I'm not that experienced with them, to be honest, with running an integration circle, but I think, going back to the tech bros or cyber bros you were just talking about, scaling. So integration circles do need mass scaling from a harm reduction perspective. There's more people now using psychedelics, I think, than ever before, even in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. Well, first about scaling is they don't need scaling from one centralized source. Like Tam Integration doesn't need to be in charge of all of the integration circles across the world. That doesn't make any sense. The world quote unquote needs. Which is basically I'm saying my preference would be is if communities got together, or somebody in a community got together and just put them together for like-minded folks. Because this might be hard for you to believe, but there's people who can't stand me. They don't want to be in an integration circle with me. That would be, grating. It would be an anathema for them. But somebody else, over there, they love their integration circles, and vice versa. There's some people that can't stand that person, but they like mine. And so, just community care, as Mr. Rogers says, we've got to have more of this expression of community care. Is a powerful thing to have them just run by folks, regular folks. And also, integration circles are pretty new. Baby, I love you. I can give him a hug real quick if he wants.
Yeah, go for it.
If he wants to come in and get a hug and be on a podcast, he's totally welcome to. Yeah, you.
So let's do a bit of YouTube. Oh, hello.
Hello. Yes.
What's your name? I'm David.
And so the other thing about the circles is we don't even really know what they can be yet. Like we run them in a way, like that are sort of built on, a variety of philosophies. There's a little bit of this and there's a little bit of that, but they're fairly new, right? They're really, really new things. Like, for example, one of the oldest circles in American history are our AA meetings, right? And they've had 100 years to kind of codify how AA meetings are run. And there's still disagreements and there's still different kinds, right? There's speaker meetings and book studies and open discussions and topic meetings. And so, but you can be fairly certain if you go around the world, an AA meeting is going to be mostly run like an AA meeting. And integration circles haven't done that yet. I've been to integration circles where somebody shares and only one guy responds, like sort of the leader of the circle. Like he gives feedback to people.
Yeah.
And I've been to ones that are like this, and I've been to ones that are like this. And but so they're growing in what they mean and what they can be. And, the introduction of like art integration circles where you're sort of having the circle while you're making art, and then you're sharing your art about your experience and these kinds of things. That's pretty cool. Like, the sky is kind of the limit, as long as there's sort of, and this is again my bias, there's this kind of structure for people to be able to work out their process in some ways.
Yeah, in the Vital course, we're starting our fourth cohort now in a few weeks. So over the last 3 cohorts, I've realized a few things. One of them's been around, we're all the same. I wear a hat of being an instructor or a lecturer and whatever, director of education at Psychedelics today. But, it's a beautiful thing that I've seen how we interact with each other. The teacher, the instructor, the student, the employee, we're literally just sharing life together, particularly in the weekly study groups. And so the weekly study groups is where we unpack, the content, the lectures of the week and the syllabus. And in a sense, those can become integration groups, not therapy groups. We're careful about knowing the difference, but folks come to that each week, and they're in a group of people they're with for a whole year, and they're sharing. I had a difficult psychedelic experience, or wow, a lot came up for me last night in my dream. And sometimes we have some Jungian analysts in the group, and they do a bit of interpretation and analysis of the dreams. But really, it's just life. And I'm not a teacher. You're not a student. We're human beings, and we're here to unpack life and to help each other understanding self, life, other, and just the experience of sharing it. And that's a beautiful thing. So those integration circles you're talking of there, and yeah, they're sacred. And I wanted to kind of bring that word sacredness in, and it gets thrown around enough. But when people authentically meet, it's sacred. And when we meet different parts of ourselves, and we give time to them, to ourselves, to meet ourselves, that's sacred as well. It doesn't matter where we are or who we are. And that's, us being connected to life. So I love, in a sense, what's coming up for me, just hearing you talking, Daniel, around what these integration circles are doing and how people can kind of use them in different ways, because it's kind of sacred connection of life itself. And it could be about trips, and it could just be about life as well.
Yes. Yeah. Depending on who you ask, there's only like 5 problems that humans have.
All at once, yeah.
It's like, I'm not getting my way. I want this to be different than that. My money's not right. It's like my sex relationships aren't right. There's only a couple of problems. And so you start to see that we're not unique, which is nice, because that's the thing. You're saying we're all the same. And what a splendid Hode, what a splendid realization that is, that that we're not isolated and alone in the way we experience life. That's really powerful and profound. That one of the things that will happen sometimes is we'll get a newer person come to integration circle, and they say, I had an experience like this. Am I crazy? And then I will, one of my favorite things to do, and folks at home, you can steal this move. One of my favorite things to do is look around the room and say, everybody raise your hand if you've had an experience where this has happened. Everybody raises their hand. And they're like, oh, and there are people like, really? Like, that's not just me? And they're like, no, that's the thing that can happen. It's not weird at all. And that's one of the things that, and how do we put this? One of the fun things about psychedelics and community, being with other psychonauts, is that either A, that's not weird at all, or B, we're all weird together. And that's kind of one of the things is the Renaissance comes forth, is that people are kind of bursting into the scene. It's like, there's this thing about like, oh, are psychedelics going mainstream? The way I see it is like, well, the mainstream's coming to us. And then the mainstream is looking at people in the community. I've had people complain to me, it's like, oh, I met so-and-so. They're weird. That person's really weird. And I'm like, yeah, we're weird. Like, what did you think? What did you think the person who's doing ayahuasca, you thought the person who's doing ayahuasca for 20 years is not going to be weird? Are they in some way unethical? They're like, no, they just have kind of like this kooky look in their eye. I was like, yeah, Yeah, their sense of humor, I don't exactly understand it. Yeah. So, like, have you met us?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's an interesting growing pain of, people, the mainstream sort of expecting psychedelic people to kind of fit into their mold of how people should be. And then also psychedelic people almost like on this search for legitimacy of like trying to jamming their peg into the wrong shaped hole in an attempt to somehow be more palatable, where the Grateful Dead said we're a lot like licorice. Not everybody likes licorice, but the people who like it really, really like it. And so, the acquired taste and having, the having a respect for, that maybe people are coming into something new and not expecting it to conform to their ideas of how things should be, because their idea of how things should be have produced the results in their life that they're trying to heal from. So it's like your healing is going to be weird. Your healing might need you to be a little weirder because you've been normal all this time and you're effing miserable.
Yeah. I love that, Daniel. I absolutely love that. Are we prepared to become more weird and less normal? Because, yeah, it's very easy and tempting to be normal, to fit in, and to assume that is kind of true and as good as it gets and who I truly am. But maybe I'm not so normal. Or maybe everyone's normal in being abnormal and weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the look in people's eyes, who have seen the infinite are like a little different. I remember watching one of my first introductions to Bill Richard's work. I was watching an interview with him, and regular looking guy in a regular suit. And a couple minutes in, he said something that was like so beyond. It was like such an expansive thought, and he kind of like winked at the interviewer and had this kind of like mischievous elfin look in his eyes. And I was like, oh yeah, that guy's there. I was like, cool. Like, because he just, at first he's a guy with a suit, but it's like 6 minutes in, I was like, oh yeah, that guy's far out. That guy's weird. He holds it together really well for the interview.
Mm-hmm. So this is a perfect time for us to dive into fractal inquiry, I think. So I've got a sense of what that means. But I'd love you to talk it through with us, because it's something that's been popping up in your social media, Daniel. And I think, we're talking about the complexities, the multiplicities, and the infinitude of us all, and getting less normal and more weird. And I think that's where fractal inquiry can help. Could you tell us more about it?
Right. Well, this is just a term that I sort of came up with to describe how I like to approach client work, right? That, like I said, coaching, I think, does the best when it serves to evoke the wisdom of the client, as opposed to telling them what to do. It's like coaching is not motivational speaking. It's not teaching. It's a creative partnership designed for the development of the other, right? And that development happens largely, in my opinion, largely through awareness, right? And so with that in mind, one of the most powerful tools in the toolbox of the coach is the skill of asking good questions, right? Rather than being like, you should do this. It's like, someone comes to the coach and they're like, oh, I can't, I have insomnia. And the coach just says, well, you should sleep more then. Did you try turning
Right.
your phone off an hour before? Oh, I don't exercise enough. And the coach says, well, you should exercise, right? This is not coaching. That's not even useful, right? It's not even useful advice. If the person could exercise more, they'd be doing it. What's really going on? So anyway, and then it gets, of course, more complicated. And people's problems are often more complicated than that. So we ask questions, understanding that the person, we're talking about procedurally generated. People are interesting, right? People are like fractals. And if you haven't zoomed in on a fractal or watched a fractal YouTube video recently, treat yourself. The more you zoom in, the more interesting and beautiful they become, right? And if you happen to zoom in and you just get a brown splotch that's not interesting, you've just zoomed in on the wrong spot. Just zoom out and zoom back in somewhere else. And so that's how I approach things, that I'm just kind of listening to what the client has to say for something that I feel like, ooh, if I ask the right question about that sentence that they said, we're probably going to get something cool. There's also this understanding, we're talking about the client is wise. If you look at like the tradition of self-inquiry, right, from sort of like an Advaita Vedanta perspective, asking the questions, who am I, what am I not, we see that, ultimately we're pure consciousness and awareness, right? From that perspective, if we believe what they say is true. And a lot of us who have had psychedelic experience have touched that, which means that the client is wise, infinitely wise, and trustworthy, right? Because this coaching, this is not therapy, right? This is for reasonably healthy, proactive people who are looking for more possibilities, opportunities, and potential for greatness and leadership, right? So these are people who can participate in this process without getting too waylaid by distress or dysregulation, right? That would need real clinical intervention. So, the how do we ask questions? How do we help people navigate through their mind in a way that brings forth more understanding about who and what they are, right? And a lot of this is just kind of based on really being curious, like having a real sense of curiosity. One of the things that I have found through interviewing coaches and talking to my students is that there's a real insecurity and lack of confidence based in, I have to really offer them something. I have to ask the right question. I have to do the right thing. I have to have the right intervention. And well, that seems like a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I have to solve their
Where,
problems.
yeah, good luck. You can't even solve your own. Give the right advice. I can't even, yeah, I can't even get my 4-year-old to take my advice. A grown person
Yeah.
to do a thing that they haven't been able to do. But if I just follow, so if I kind of understand that I have basically, like, Rumi again, we're all God in drag, right? Like I'm a soul sitting with a soul, right? We're both infinitely wise, pretending to be confused. And I'm going to follow my natural curiosity in a way that is potentially evocative and thought-provoking for the other person, then it's a win. The person will come in and they'll, recite their litany of their day, their week. And then you're like, okay, like, here's a couple of cool things that you said. Why don't we explore one of them? Okay, let's explore it a little deeper. Let's explore it a little deeper. Let's explore it a little deeper. And of course, at some point you would bring in other coaching tools, but that's the inquiry part, right? And so, kind of learning about how people's minds work, how people navigate through the world. So, one of the things we like to explore are kind of just different frameworks of how people view themselves and view the world and things like that. The difference, are we talking about the now? Are we talking about the future? Are we talking about the past? Just, and just being able to orient yourself within somebody's mind, so that your curiosity, does evoke awareness, is kind of what we're trying to do. It's kind of big underpinning of, what we teach in like the TAM coaching training, and what your students will get a peek of in a couple of months as well.
It fits nicely with the coaching hat. I'm a therapist, and I'm really interested in what coaches are doing and how they work in the space. And I like how Fractal Inquiry, in a sense, holds space for, I think for the questions to flow and to hit really, not like a sharp tender spot, but to be really well positioned and connected to that energy between the people, so that the question is like, just moves it, zooming in, like splices that piece of footage and then goes deeper and deeper. And I think coaches, somehow they have a bit more permission to do that. I don't know if they're more human than therapists are, who are taught to be perhaps a little bit detached and, have maybe more elitist. But I think coaches really, they just hold, I think, this more nitty gritty piece where they can, I don't know, what is it about coaches?
What is it about coaches? Okay, so this is not always true, but since you mentioned elitism, right? So the elitism presupposes a separation, right? It presupposes some kind of verticality. Have you read Naomi Remen,
No.
In Service of Life? Required reading, In Service of Life, right? So, or if we're helping, I'm in a position to help and you're someone who needs it, right? So there's a separation there. If I'm fixing, it means you're broken, right? If I serve you, it means you're holy, right? I'm not helping or fixing, I'm serving, right? That which is holy in you, right? When we're coaching, so therapy in some ways, in its underpinnings, in its roots, presupposes a pathology in a lot of ways, right? There's some sort of mental or emotional distress that needs to be ameliorated, right? This person is not okay in some way, and it's my job to help them get okay in some way, right? So it presupposes some kind of brokenness or twist or something like that.
Yeah.
Coaching, I mean, if you've ever watched Hoosiers, or you've ever watched any, if you think about even just athletic coaches, right? Who's the coach with the guy with the mustache who's so popular these days? His show just ended.
Oh, the TV show? Yeah, everyone says I should watch that. It's the American soccer coach in England, yeah? That one?
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's really a sweet show. It's so lovely. It's so lovely. I bet you $1 you cry at some point during it. I mean, because of just how lovely and beautiful it is. But what he is doing is he's taking people who are awesome and working to make them better. Right? So are you working with broken people and trying to fix them? Or are you working with people who are good or great, who have even greater untapped resources of greatness within them, and supporting them as they unlock that and touch that and experiment with it in new ways? That's what coaching's about.
I just looked it up. Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso's my man.
Wow. And yeah, I don't know much about that, but yeah, I think he's a vulnerable, non-perfect being.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there's a great scene where he talks about the difference between judgment and curiosity, right? So inquiry asks you to suspend judgment and move into curiosity, right? Curiosity is like the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to do that. I think judgment precludes it. To hold both is probably not possible. It's very hard. I think, yeah, judgment's all around us, Daniel. I think a lot of our narratives
Is it
are filled with it.
Is it only around us?
I think we are it. Like, I think a lot of how we identify and interpret and experience reality is filled with judgments and
Right.
and it takes away the curiosity. Yeah.
This comes back to bringing ourselves back to the center, back to the breath, back to the moment, because judgment can't be reasoned with, right? There's not, it's sort of like you don't have to tolerate the intolerant, right? You don't have to be curious about the judgment. At some level, it's just like, stop. Come back to the center. Okay, you're doing the thing where you're hating the person because you're hating yourself. Just knock it, just stop. Because we're talking about a neuroplasticity issue at this point, right? You've got these super highways to judgment and hatred and shame designed for, your own safety, significance, and connection, but it's not performing the way you want. Whereas your curiosity is like this tiny little pathway that just needs to be hacked away at a machete. But that's where your joy and your connection and your dignity really lie.
And I feel that connects nicely with internal family systems as well. We've got this part of judgment that shows up a lot, and then there's maybe the self with a capital S has the ability to hold curiosity and maybe even bring like neuroscience into it. Kind of the rebus model and neuroplasticity and all of that stuff, which is part of this psychedelic puzzle. But that ability to not just repeat the same thought patterns and behaviors and habits, to actually have that ability to kind of reconnect some of that circuitry, but also just to hold a space before we even have to reconnect. Just to disconnect in a sense, and then feel what that's like, and then move from that space into a new pasture.
Yeah. We can let bad habits wither on the vine.
There's one more chunky topic I'd like us to chew on, Daniel. That is the
Chunky.
question around let's chew on some chunks of collective disillusionment versus individual disillusionment. So this was something we'd spoken about before. Like, let's jump into that one. Over to you.
Well, we covered it a little bit.
Okay.
We covered it a little bit with the mainstream coming to us. Right? So collective disillusionment and individual. So I don't know about you, but I bought fake weed in the train station when I was 13.
Me too, but I was in Birmingham.
Yeah, I was in Philly.
It was just I think oregano.
Yeah, and so the thing is, I was 13. I was not quick on the uptake. I did it like 6 times.
Yeah,
the same guy. I was like, am I high? Am I not getting high? Is this working? Am I doing it wrong? Right? And so at some point I was like, oh, these guys don't have my best interest at heart. Right? And then also throughout that, the other just kind of moving through counterculture and underground, there's different kinds of weird people. And there's weird people who you can not trust at all. And there's weird people who you can trust a little bit. And there's weird people you can trust a lot. And you start to learn to suss that out. And, you get burned at various times and things don't play out the way you want. And you get betrayed in ways that are sometimes big and sometimes little. But then also you find, I don't know if they're elders, but they're older, bigger kids and some grown-ups and stuff who sort of guide the way a little bit. And you start to kind of suss things out. And then also you're like less shocked sometimes when things go weird, when things go wrong. You're like, oh yeah, I can see how that happened. I messed up. Like sometimes, I don't know if you've ever like taken a stock tip from somebody who maybe you shouldn't have. And you're like, oh, well that, CRISPR's way down. What was I thinking? It's like, oh, well, you listen to that guy. Maybe you shouldn't have, it's like, and you're not, and it's not, and what, you're going to go drag that guy through the mud? He's just a dummy who doesn't know that much about stocks. He knows more than you, but not that much. And so you just sort of like kind of get used to these little dings getting knocked around a little bit as you sort of navigate the world, because the world is not covered in Nerf balls, right? The world is not, that term nerfed?
No, I mean, my son had a Nerf gun. Is it like that thing that shoots the kind of foam bullets?
Yeah, but there's this, there's, I don't know who told me, you can't nerf the world, right? You can't cover the world in foam.
Oh yeah, there's a beautiful saying about that. Yeah, like we could cover the world in leather, or we could just wear sandals, so wherever we walk is a bit softer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just watch where you walk a little bit more, and sometimes and so there was this thing recently. I mean, these things happen all the time, but um, yeah, I just see people kind of, I don't want to name it too much, but again, like people are sometimes shocked that things aren't what they seem sometimes. And it's not necessarily due to malevolent intent. It's just, people are just people and they're doing what they're doing and they're offering what they're offering. And it works for some folks and it doesn't work for other folks. And uh, so there's this kind of learning curve that in the past, and it's really nobody's fault. I'm not blaming anybody really, but like what I'm saying is like in the past, we would go through our psychedelic underground maturation process um, kind of individually or in small groups. And now it's happening at more of a group level, kind of faster, quicker, bigger kind of thing. And so we're seeing these sort of people are unhappy about a way a thing is going down, or they're learning a thing about a thing and they're kind of shocked. And that's a normal and natural part of learning things, not, especially in a Wild West scenario. How is that
Yeah.
landing? I don't know if I'm explaining it all that well. Can
Yeah.
you want to riff back to me some of what
Yeah.
you think
I'll some of what I'm gonna riff back is around. I'm not sure what the words would be, but around our own individual dings that you're saying, how that might feel like a disillusioning experience, a scenario, a reality that we have, and in a sense, not to project it onto my collective experiencing of life, of reality, of the meaning of here. Like I think a lot of people, it's very easy, to be, I think, quite nihilistic and, in a sense, to give up on myself, of life being radically different, or to have that, in a sense, curiosity. I think curiosity is a radical revolutionary piece, and I think the problem with disillusionment or judgment, as we were just talking about, is they can't kind of live in the same house together. So I'm hearing partially around, not to let those dings, in a sense, numb us, or to make us kind of cynical and angry and project it onto others. That was part of what I'm getting off it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it hopefully it serves to kind of galvanize our intention and our mission. Like, are we like why are we showing up? It's like, are we really trying to do something deep and profound, or not? Or are we just curious? If you're just curious, yeah, you do it. What and a different kind of curious. Are we just sort of wanting to see what it's all about, right? And it's like, okay, we saw what it's all about. We're going on to something else. That was like me
Yeah.
with capoeira. I took like 2 capoeira classes, and I was like, that was cool. I'm good, right? Like it wasn't like I don't have a mission, you know. But also there is also like a lot of this thing because like there's going to be risk in this, right? Just like there's risk in spiritual communities, right? We were talking about Amma, and that works really well for like a lot of people, but there's a lot of people there, and sometimes they interact in ways that aren't great. I've met amazing people at Amma, but I've also um, met some real jerks. It's like, oh, and sometimes like, oh, this person seems cool. I'm going to try and work on a project with them. And it was horrific and horrendous. Am I going to write off the whole thing? It's like, no, you just your filter wasn't good, and you worked with that person. It's inherently risky, and then you're working with your mind, and you're working with your emotions, and you're picking up the hood, and it's like it's like we're trying to drive a manual. We're just used to driving an automatic. And this is risky stuff. It's like, I mean, skiing, snowboarding, risky activities, skydiving, risky activities. All of this stuff is not to quote who are we going to quote next? Most Def. For me and you, life is not promised. Tomorrow may never come. Right? We're doing strange, risky things, and we're going to make mistakes, and other people are going to make mistakes. We're going to bounce off each other wrong, and yeah. So you pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you learn your lessons and you keep going because what you feel like you're doing is important and it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important piece for us to remember. And so we've been covering this idea of difficult conversations. And I remember someone once told me about difficult conversations, difficult relationships, and going along with what you were saying about these dings that we have, in a sense, we have sharp edges to us. And sometimes when our sharp edges, our collective sharp edges, come into contact with each other, kind of sparks fly. But maybe they help us to learn about our sharp edges a little bit more, and not so much the other person's, but we can help each other smooth each other and ourselves off a little bit around those edges. Just become a bit more smooth so we can coexist a bit more easily. Daniel, we've been talking a long time, and as I suspected we would, and I've loved it, mate. Thank you.
I'm having a blast.
I want to just give you, a bit of time before we kind of wrap to talk about your integration coaching training program that's starting soon. So what is it like? What's the idea, and how does it all work?
Yeah. Well, it's the only program out there that is potentially arguably better than Vital.
Okay. Controversial.
Vital is a solid number 2 to the Tam Integration coaching program.
Yeah, objectively speaking, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think what you guys are doing is great. I just kind of have my own way of doing things. And, what we are, and I see in a lot of ways, our coaching training program is almost like a technical school. In a lot of ways, it's like HVAC, or or car mechanics, in that, we're really focused on skills training. We're really, it's like I'm in the trenches. Like, I like working with people. I really like coaching people. I love my private practice and my private practice clients. And I think working with people in this way is pretty profound. Having these conversations, like the honor of being able to walk through people's minds with them, whether it's before, during, or after a psychedelic experience, is really a beautiful thing. And so, we're really curious about how do we structure a coaching engagement? What are the pieces and practices of good coaching? And how does that dovetail into, an understanding of a good psychedelic practice? And so we've got a year-long program that is, designed to explore those topics. And it's kind of small. We're like, back when I had my yoga studio, I had like a one-room schoolhouse. It was like there was a little, front area, and there's one classroom in it, one yoga room. It held about 25 people. And 25 people is, generally, it's fairly kind of a sweet spot for me. Between 12 and 20 people is sort of the kind of number of people I've been teaching, at least at a deep level, for a long time. Occasionally I get in front of 100 or whatever, and that's cool too. But so I really like knowing my people. I really like the relationships that evolve, and I really want people to have the skills that they will need to become excellent coaches, people who will be able to partner in the development of their clients to support them becoming greater. That's kind of what we're all about. And it's interesting because in some ways the year-long program is also just an initiation, because these are skills that need to be developed over time through practice, right? It's not like you can't come and then I just sort of make you. Nobody can make you a coach, right? You got to make yourself a coach, right? You make yourself a coach by coaching, and sometimes that means doing a lot of bad coaching for a while. I think my first yoga class was atrocious, but I've taught some good ones since then. You know, your first coaching conversation might be atrocious, but you keep doing it, and you pick up some things. It becomes, you get to that range of unconscious competence, as they say. I'm still trying to get there. I'm still trying to achieve mastery, and I think that that's a daily thing. And so we start in October. We've got a bunch of good guests as well. Some pretty great people. Teaching things like drug interactions and ceremonial skills and the like. It's escaping me right now, but it's a pretty good kind of grassroots program. And again, it's the kind of thing where do we need to scale? Does Tam Integration need to teach all of the integration coaches in the world? No. I would nothing would make me happier if there were a lot of other like homegrown one-room schoolhouses doing it. Of course, what you guys are doing is great too, but we do it our way, and hopefully people find the right fit. That's my
Sounds great.
spiel for now.
Beautiful. Beautiful, man. Yeah, tell us, where do we find out more information? So your website and just, generally about the Tam Integration, circles, how to find that stuff.
Oh, well, I mean, you can, the circles. I mean, we've got a men's circle, an open circle, a women's circle, art circle, and those are all available at tamintegration.com. People seem to like the things I share on Instagram, which is also Tam Integration. We've got all the Tam Integrations, across all the social media platforms. And, we've got a member site at tam.zone where I have like small group, I've got like a group coaching thing for folks. And, we share meditations and some special master classes and things like that. So the Tam zone is kind of new, but it's a pretty fun place to be at a fairly affordable rate for, a community that's diving pretty deep. And that's where we can be found. And also you can look for me in Massachusetts.
You live out in the woods, huh?
I live out in the woods. Try and find,
Nice.
I'm here.
Nice. All right, man. Well, I look forward to seeing you again in real life, and I hope we have you back in less than 5 years, Daniel. But this has been beautiful to chat, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I love connecting with you. Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.